Welcome everybody to the Werewolf Bar. I'm Brian Easton, author of the Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter series, and this is Whiskey with a Werewolf Hunter. Our creature of the night is a rye from Quarter Horse. Quarter Horse is better known for its bourbon, but it also makes a mean rye, and so I thought I'd feature it on the show tonight. It's been a while since we've had a good rye on Whiskey with the Werewolf Hunter. To you. And that is everything a rye should be, in my opinion. It has a kind of a licorice, almost leathery kind of a thing going on, and you want that kind of a bite, that black pepper bite in a good rye. So this evening I have a couple of things for you. I'm going to start you off with the top 10 countdown. I had so much fun doing the top 10 countdown of my most influential werewolves a few weeks ago that I thought I would do another one. And then after that, we've got an interview with Basil Sands. Now, Basil, if you don't know, is the narrator for the audio books of my entire series. And so you're going to want to stick around for that. But right now, let's count down my personal top 10 most influential werewolf movies. Here are my top 10 werewolf-related movies of all time. Number 10, Werewolf of London. Universal's original outing into Wereworld features a very different take on werewolfery. Henry Hull plays Dr. Wilford Glendon, botanist and titular werewolf, one of the great-grandfathers of werewolf film. Number 9, The Werewolf vs. the Vampire Woman, one of Paul Naschy's many films featuring Waldemar Daninsky as the Spanish Lawrence Talbot. I like this one because of the Vampire Woman mostly. Number 8, The Wolf of Snow Hollow, maybe the best thing to come out of 2020, and that's not saying much, but I like the twists and dark humor in this one. Plus, I'm a big fan of Robert Forster, so this was his last role. Number 7 is The Brotherhood of the Wolf. Not technically a werewolf movie, but it's centered around the 18th century Beast of Gévaudan killings. It's a French film with a Native American element, part mystery, part martial arts, part fantasy horror. It's a weird combo that works overall, even if the film does kind of unravel a little bit near the end. Number 6, Silver Bullet, based on Stephen King's Cycle of the Werewolf. It gets a lot of hate, I think, because the werewolf looks more like a bear, but the horror aspect is there. The treatment of Everett McGill's Reverend Lowe shows a steady decline of humanity in the face of the beast, and if nothing else, Gary Busey is always entertaining to watch. Number 5, The Wolfman 2010. Yes, I like this remake and I liked it a lot. Del Toro makes a wonderfully morose Lawrence Talbot, Anthony Hopkins a menacing, mysterious father. The thing I like most about it is that it takes itself seriously. I like the dialogue and the fact that it is a period piece. I think all Universal Monsters remakes, if they're going to remake them, should be required to be period pieces. This one just works for me. Number 4, American Werewolf in London. This one's made its way into most werewolf top 10 lists. Rick Baker won an Oscar for his innovation on special effects. And the werewolf imagery extends beyond the wolf itself and explores several occult ideas within the paradigm of the beast. What stands out to me, it's the first time I ever realized that the transformation was painful. Number 3, The Wolfman. 1941 classic werewolf film. Lon Chaney Jr. is the haunted Larry Talbot, the archetype of the cursed werewolf. I've loved this film since I was a kid, and it was instrumental. Number 2, Curse of the Werewolf. And it might be surprising to find this Hammer film up so near the top. It's not that Oliver Reed's performance was so fantastic, and the werewolf makeup is definitely not my favorite, but I saw this film at an impressionable age, and the scenes of humiliation, rape, and torture left an indelible mark on me that associates werewolves with all those things. Number 1, The Howling. This should surprise nobody. Loosely based on the book by Gary Bradner, the original 1981 film has several things that put it over the top for me. Rob Bottin's groundbreaking special effects, the connections with werewolves and serial killers, and rapist Forey Ackerman's cameo in the occult bookshop scene, just to name a few. But it's the movie's depiction of werewolves are bad that resounded the loudest of me. Mine just get worse from there. And I just want to add that The Curse of the Werewolf, the Hammer film at number 2, there on that list. Leon, played by Oliver Reed, that character is the only werewolf in this list, and maybe the only werewolf, period, to have not become a werewolf through the bite of another werewolf. Leon was born the product of rape and on Christmas Day. So the movie leads you to believe that he was an offense to heaven, and that has always held especially religiously terrifying significance to me. Well, Miles Booth over at MB Press had a chance to sit down with Basil Sands this last weekend. And now, as you may or may not know, MB Press and I are going to be collaborating on a Legends of the Werewolf anthology coming your way sometime next fall. And Miles is going to be doing interviews with all of the authors that we've invited onto the anthology, and as well as those who are going to be earning their way in, so to speak, with their contributions. So with that in mind, we're kicking it off with Basil Sands in the hot seat. Wonderfully talented man. You're going to like him a lot. He's been on the show before. Maybe you remember him. But here's Miles Booth and Basil Sands.
Good evening. I'm Miles Booth of MB Press, and tonight we're with Basil Sands, a contributing author to the Legends of the Werewolf Hunter anthology. And of course, the Legends of the Werewolf Hunter is the book based on Brian P. Easton's Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter series. Tonight we're going to be talking to Basil about his connections to the works and his story that he's going to be writing for that. And how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing terrific. I'm doing great. Thank you. All the way from, you're in New York, correct?
I'm actually, no, I'm all the way in Florida.
Oh, so
Yeah.
that is even more so. We're like on total opposite corners of the continent.
We are. I'm South Florida, near Fort Myers tonight. And
I'm in Anchorage, Alaska.
You did not go swimming at the beach today.
No, I did not. And I could have. The ocean stays relatively ice free, except for the bergs floating around. But yeah.
All right. Well, that's. We didn't have any birds, but it was a perfect beach day here.
Nice.
I kind of feel guilty about saying, but it was amazing.
Oh, nice. Last January, I was actually down in St. Petersburg for a couple of weeks. Me and the wife, I had some work stuff to do down there, and we took a week of vacation. Gorgeous place.
Oh, just fantastic. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so let's get started. Let's talk about your ties to Brian's work. And what people may or may not know is when they listen to the audiobooks, that's your voice. Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about how you got started with that, and how you got into Brian's works specifically.
Yeah, how I got to meet Sylvester and Michael Winterfox. Mm-hmm. Well, the story begins way back at the turn of the century, almost. 2004, I got a very, very boring government IT job where I sat around watching stuff not break for days and days at a time. And it was challenging to stay awake there. So I started writing stories. And I was writing some short little, like one day I was driving to work, and as I'm driving to work, I stopped at a stoplight, and suddenly in my mind, I saw this picture of a guy in a blue jumpsuit with a flat top, crew cut hair, and sweat just dripping off the guy's face. And I couldn't get that image out of my mind all day. And so I was like, what the heck? What was that? Who was that guy? And so I wrote like a one-page short story for this little flash fiction contest that was out there about a spaceship crashing, like a space tourism, fly around the Earth, 2 shots, and then you land. Well, this one crashed. And then someone asked me at the end of that, they said, what happens next? I mean, you got this guy in the desert. What desert is he in? Where's he at? And I was like, yeah. Huh, that's a good question. next thing I know, I had 83,000 words in my first novel in about a year later. But along the way, I had been publishing it as blog posts, chapter by chapter, and then I put it out as a podcast, serialized podcast story, audiobook, on a website called Podiobooks, which I believe still exists, and you can get your audiobooks there for free, but they're all totally independently produced, as in the person may have been recording it while sitting on the toilet using their iPhone. So you never know the quality that you're going to get till you get into it. But anyway, I recorded for that, and another friend of mine, John Gilstrap, who's a popular thriller writer, a USA Today best-selling guy, he asked if I could start narrating his books. He didn't particularly care for the original narrator. It was weird. His is a thriller series based in the United States with the former Delta Force commandos as the main characters, and they had a British guy doing the narration. I was like, huh? No, why would they do that? So John, after a couple of books, he asked if I would do it. Audible called me and said, hey, we got this contract. We want to hire you. Do you want to do it? And I said, yes. And next thing you know, bang, 2009, 10, I had my first audiobooks out. Fast forward to about 2016-ish, I think. 16, 17, I think. And I'm working for Audible pretty much full time by that time. And I had what they called the 13-week contract, where they would take books from lesser known authors or backlist books that they just wanted to get out there. And his books, the first 3 of the Werewolf Hunter series, were included in one of those 13-week bundles. Basically, they would send me a digital box of books, and I would have 13 weeks to get these recorded on an average of 10 to 15 hours of finished product a week, which is about 45 to 50 hours of work per week. And so I'm cranking those out, and I had narrated at that time lots of horror. Probably half of my repertoire was horror. And I don't particularly like horror myself. I just don't. My imagination is deep enough that I don't need to read something to get scared. I can do that all on my own. So anyway, I ran into Brian's books, and I was like, oh, great, monster books. I got into that book and into the person, into the mind of Sylvester and Michael Winterfox, and holy cow, it was like I was there. That was this. I will say this is the first time that I have read a horror novel and actually, loved it. I was like, oh man, I want more. I finished those 3 books. They got online. And I wrote to Brian directly and said, hey, I love those. Those were the most awesome.
Gotcha.
I mean, they were realistic. It felt to me like if werewolves were a real thing, this is what it would be like.
Yeah.
And so anyway, that's how I got introduced to Brian, through the long way. It took me writing 4 or 5 novels and getting hired and getting all these contracts just so I could meet Brian for this project, because this is going to change the world.
I think so.
Yeah,
no doubt about that. But that's very cool as far as having a connection to the books. How many books have you recorded over the years?
I've got. See, I actually had Audible because I was checking to see if one of my newer ones had just come up, which it's almost. There's 109 published right now that are available on Audible, and you get probably about 25 more than that are either no longer available or were for independent publishers that whoever got it, I don't know, but I got paid. So about 130, 140. And
how many authors did you create a relationship with?
Oh, 3.
Okay.
John Gilstrap, who I was already acquainted with. We became closer friends in the process of, I record his books about 1 a year for the last 10 years. Brian, of course, and we've actually gotten to a point where we chat on a regular basis. And then, believe it or not, Piers Anthony, who was a famous kids fantasy author from the 80s.
Very familiar with his work, yeah.
He and I started chatting. He's like 90 years old. And every once in a while, I narrated several of his books for those 13-week contracts. And it's like I narrated his early stuff before he was famous.
Which book?
When his speculative science fiction was weird and sometimes creepy.
Yeah.
And so people who grew up with the Xanth trilogy
Uh-huh.
will get a totally different, or not trilogy, the Xanth series.
Yep.
Will get a totally different view of Piers Anthony, I think, if they read all of his pre-Xanth stuff. Some of it was
Trying to
awesome.
remember. I read. Oh, we're going way back now. Was there one called Ghost Spaceship? Is that what you're talking about? Or?
There, not that one. There was a bunch of the early ones I really liked. They were really cool science fiction, Twilight Zone-y, 60s, 70s kind of early science fiction stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty cool.
Okay.
And then there's one series, it was called Biography of a Space Tyrant. That's what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a series of books that started off with Refugee and then Mercenary, and they're all named different things. And basically it takes a family that there's something going on and they got to escape the planet where they're at for political persecution. So they get on this ship and they take off, and they get attacked by pirates, space pirates. And basically the whole first book is this ship getting attacked by space pirates over and over again. The crew getting massacred over and over, or not, the same people dying over and over, but till there's nothing left but children. And rape. Lots and lots of rape, sometimes graphically described. And that's where I kind of was like, oh, this isn't the Piers Anthony that I remember as a kid.
Right, yeah.
This is the one that was still trying to flesh out his sci-fi wings. And whoa, yeah, some of it may have been prosecutable in some countries. Let's just put it that way. But it's out there. Audible published it, so and it actually does pretty well, apparently. So
right. He's a big name.
He is.
His stuff in a really long time. Actually, that's funny.
Yeah.
So we'll tell him I said hello.
I will.
Quite his stuff. Great. All right. So bringing this back into a little bit of focus. So you read Brian's books, and they obviously made an impression on you. Yeah. And you recorded the books, and I've listened to those books, and your voice actually changes a little bit, just to the level of gravity over the course of the first, second, and third book. And of course, we're talking about Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter, Part of Scars, and then The Lineage.
Right.
And just out of curiosity, because I kind of, whenever I'm talking about these books with other people, what was your reaction to how that trilogy progressed? And specifically, in my opinion, it went from a little bit different focus of the inner workings of a man in his mind in an extreme situation, and then he brought in much more of an international and worldly feel to it, and then he took it to a much greater scope, not Wheel of Time, but definitely I think of it like a Raiders of the Lost Ark kind of adventure. What was your approach to this as a voice artist, recording all of those books?
As when I previewed through the books before I started recording, I could see the progression of the character. I mean, Sylvester goes from being a not so innocent kid, kind of a backwoods Canadian roughneck kind of kid, with a harsh childhood, with growing up with a guy that he doesn't even realize is his grandpa yet, and then you watch him grow, and you can see the path that it's going to take, kind of, and so as I prepped for it, I could see, oh yeah, okay, he's going to be getting darker and darker. His personality. I work in my day job outside, in addition to recording full time and having a business recording and writing. I'm an IT guy still for a government job, but it's not as boring as it used to be, because now I'm a senior guy, which means it's not boring anymore.
Got it.
So in my day job, I work as an IT guy still for the Department of Veterans Affairs, and I have a lot of interaction. Primarily with the medical staff, nurses, counselors, and also the vocational rehabilitation counselors and so on. And one of the biggest issues is PTSD.
Right, sure.
And we can see the symptoms.
Right.
We'll get guys that come in that spent 20, 30 years in the special forces. And yeah, they're physically banged up, but they're mentally extremely resilient. So even though, their muscles, their bones are crackling, they'll force themselves to walk and they'll force themselves to get through and try to show no pain. But you can see in their personalities where spending 30 years killing people,
right?
It was for your country. It was, you had to do it, but at the same time, it starts to take a mental toll. And some of those guys can be really peaceful. Usually the ones that have some type of religious experience or some type of something that they can meditate or get away from the images in their mind. Those guys are usually, they're still carrying the baggage, but they're usually pretty calm about it. And I pictured Sylvester kind of as that. He's doing this really vicious thing. And part of what led me to kind of put it I kind of thought of Sylvester as being like what they call the Templars or something like that, where they're on a religious mission of sorts to destroy this ultimate evil. And so because of that, he knows I have to do this or the world is doomed. But I'm really getting tired of the blood, of seeing dead people and making dead people. And so that's why it gets gruffer and gruffer as it goes, because in his mind, he knows he's doomed. He's a dead man walking. Mm-hmm. And he just doesn't know when it's going to come. And he keeps throwing himself into the jaws of the wolf, literally, and somehow coming out on the other end, probably not expecting it. And that, like I said, all of that takes a toll. And so that's how I chose to, over the course of those books, to make him rougher sounding and rougher sounding.
It was extremely well done. And that's it's pretty fascinating to know that that's the kind of thought process going into each and every aspect of the development of these works. But the recording artist having a background with veterans, PTSD, and then working that into the character. That's amazing. I'm glad that we got to talk about that. I did not.
Oh yeah.
I had no idea.
Oh yeah. Well, as a writer, and maybe that allows me to have a slightly different perspective than a lot of narrators or voice actors, because I create my own stories too. I've got about a dozen full-length novels out, published through Brian's same publisher, Permuted Press, and I do a lot of research and stuff for that. So if I'm narrating something that's of a similar genre, my personal research bleeds over into my presentation of someone else's story.
And once you become a researcher in one thing, it kind of bleeds over in every other aspect of creating the art. Yes. Let's use that to segue into your writing career. And would you say that the Ice Hammer series is the most popular? Or are there other works? Or
my Ice Hammer series. It's 3 books, a trilogy, and that's my most recent published book. Okay. Right. And I would say also it's my most ambitious project. Okay. Like I said earlier, my first book, Carl's Last Flight, it's out there as well. I had self-published 4 novels before Ice Hammer, and then Permuted picked up my backlist and signed me for Ice Hammer, the series, at the same time. And so they republished those. I've got Carl's Last Flight, my second book, 65 Below, which takes place right up here in Alaska, in my hometown, actually, in Fairbanks. The third book, Faithful Warrior, is another they're all military thrillers. And then the last book in that quasi-series, Midnight Sun, which takes place right here in Anchorage, Alaska, where I live currently. The books themselves are not a series. The main character is different in each book, but the main character from each book is a background character in every other book.
Okay.
So the first book has Carl of Carl's.
Just different facets of the series.
Yeah, exactly. So they're in that world. Ice Hammer is also in that world, in that fiction world,
Okay.
but it revolves around a completely new set of characters. There's one recurring character that I have that's in all but one of my books, and that's a guy named Karzai Ghiasi, who is a Iranian. His parents were Iranian immigrants. He was born and raised in Indiana, but he's a CIA spy who speaks, a dozen languages and is kind of crazy and very violent. But fun. He's a fun character. But he goes through all of my books, including the Ice Hammer series, which picks up about a year or so after the previous book. Ice Hammer takes a completely different tack in storytelling from my experience, from my previous works. First off, it's a story about a family, one family in Alaska, here in Anchorage, during a Chinese-Russian invasion of North America at some point in the not too distant future. And this invasion happens. The father, the wife, or the husband, the wife, and three sons are all in different places. The husband is in his vehicle. He just dropped the boys off at Boy Scout camp, two of the boys. The third boy works up on the North Slope as a cook, and the wife is in the opposite side of town at home, waiting for her husband to come back for a long weekend. And in the middle of that, the Chinese invade, and all of them assume the others are dead or missing over time. The series covers a period of 3 years where the main character, the father, becomes the leader of one of the largest resistance groups, kind of by accident. And yeah, it was ambitious because it was my longest set. I wanted to outline the entire 3-book series before I started writing anything. So I did. And I had 3 complete storylines running parallel. The father's storyline, the wife's storyline, and the 2 of the 3 sons. And then the third son, you only hear him mentioned until the very last book where a scene shows up with him. Yeah. And I based the characters on my actual wife and children and myself. Okay. Loosely, very loosely.
I get it.
But emotionally, and so when I write in there things about how handsome Brad Stone is, I wasn't looking in a mirror. I wasn't. It really was. Because, yeah, well, you guys can see me. Whatever you picture about Brad Stone is not me.
we all do this. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So anyway, I based the characters on my family, and I found that as I was writing it, emotionally, I got really tied into it. Mm-hmm. And when I would bring stuff up with my wife, throughout the story, the husband and wife are separated for 3 years. The husband believes he saw the wife's dead body in her own car, not realizing her sister had borrowed the car. Okay. But he sees what he's convinced is her dead body wearing her favorite shirt in her special car with a special license plate. And so he's like, well, that's it for that. And he moves on into an almost suicidal type of vengeance against the Chinese. But in the course of time, he also meets a girl who had a crush on him for years when he was a teacher, and they end up getting married and having a child. And he still doesn't know that his wife is alive the whole time. And under the care of the commanding general of the Chinese army, she becomes a prisoner because she's a doppelganger for that Chinese general's dead wife. Oh. And it's kind of a weird situation, but the 2 are parallel and actually meeting without knowing it at many points during the story until the very end when they actually get together. But I will, without spoiling it, I will say it is not a happy ending. So don't expect it to be a, oh boy, ending at the end. It is, I think, a pretty powerful ending, but I tried to write a realistic book that connected with my own emotions in that.
Absolutely.
So that's my previous project, my most recently published one.
Okay. And I'm going to take for granted that you've done all the audio recordings of all of your own books and that they're all available. I should point this out on Amazon, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And are there any other outlets that you actually prefer readers to buy your works from?
I don't know. wherever they like to get them. I think Permuted puts them out everywhere. So
right, okay.
They're on Amazon, they're on iTunes, they're on Kobo, and
okay. All right. Well, let's let's take this in the direction then of, if you don't mind, talking about what you have put together so far for the Legends of the Werewolf Hunter book. What story are you writing for that? If you'll give us some hints.
Well, I will. The story is actually a character who I had created this character for one of my next projects, one of the new writing series that I'm starting. A series, the working title is Kings of Earth, and it deals with civilization before the flood of Noah. So the first 7 chapters of the Bible, basically. But it takes a imaginary picture of, in my mind, of what that world might have looked like. It's not really defined in the Bible, in the pre-flood stories, doesn't really say what the civilization was like, except that at the end, all of the stories agree they were so wicked, God or the gods sent a flood to destroy everybody. And so in that imaginary, as I was writing that and starting the outlining and starting the work on that, I came up with a character who's named Argon, son of Ur. And Ur, as many people know, is an ancient Sumerian city, one of the first large cities. It's about 5,000, 6,000 years old. It's, of course, cities at that time especially were all named after people. And so this guy Ur, if you look back in some of the genealogies, there were people named Ur who were famous fathers back in the biblical genealogies. So I took a line of Adam that was different. Instead of going through, Adam, and then they talk about Adam had Seth, and Seth had so on and so on and so on, all the way down to Noah. I took one of Seth's younger brothers and moved a character who was like 4 generations removed from Adam. So he was about, the story starts about 1,000 years after they get expelled from the garden, and they end up living outside, and evil slowly is coming in. And shortly after the death of Adam himself, this guy Argon starts to rise as a ruler, as a leader, and he becomes a very despotic tyrant, to the point where he's doing things that, like legends of vampires come from some of the wickedness that he did. He was kind of like the Vlad the Impaler of the pre-flood in my story. Very wicked guy who becomes an emperor of his own and is pivotal in the story. But because of the massive evils that he was committing, the archangel Michael actually appears to him personally and says, paraphrased, dude, you done messed up. You have hurt so many people that you're under a curse now. And that curse, for 100 generations, you will die, but never die. You will rise and you will be you until you repent of all the evil that you've done. So basically, Argon, and of course, he's like at the time, what kind of punishment is that? To live forever? Not realizing what he's about to get into. He continues on with his evil ways. He resurrects after the flood. He comes back. By that time, he's been resurrected twice already, and he's starting to realize the cycle here that Michael is resurrecting him not in the place where he died, but in the next worst place in existence. So in other words, he goes from a war in this country where he gets killed trying to defend somebody, and when he resurrects, he wakes up not too far from another battlefield somewhere else. And he's going to be suffering for these 100 generations until he realizes the amount of suffering that he caused. In about the 4th or 5th regeneration, he becomes the captain of the King's Blades for Sargon, the King of the Plains. And this is before Sargon becomes Sargon the Great, ruler of Acadia and Sumeria. And while he's just a small king beginning as conquering, my character Argon is a guy with no past, as far as they know. He just is perpetually 40 years oldish and walks around doing tough guy stuff. And he becomes the leader of the king's men, and they come into contact with a werewolf-like being. And they don't realize what it is, except this guy is just flat out evil, and he just infected the princess, and things get wicked from there. There's alternating storylines in this. It starts off with a different storyline, goes into that storyline, and comes back because, like I said, Argon regenerates every time he gets killed.
Right.
And so, and it's not fun regeneration, it's not like respawning. Like I said, he wakes up in terror every place he goes. So yeah, that's the character that I'm writing into this story. I talked about it with Brian, and we were like, whoa, this could really tie in, because with this character skipping around in time, basically, he could appear in many places. And so who knows, in the future there may be collaborations with him and Sylvester and Michael all showing up together at some point in time. I don't know. But
exciting.
That's where that story is going. I'm really excited for it. Actually I was up until 2:00 this morning reading it or writing it. So yeah.
It sounds amazing. So the thought that keeps coming through my mind is, you're not a horror fan, you say?
I am not a horror fan, but these monsters, I do like fantasy. And so what I equate these werewolves with would be something more like something between a wizard and an orc. It's like a carnivorous wizard, and they're out there doing bad stuff, infecting other people. They're just plain evil bad guys, and not unbelievable like Cthulhu type monsters and stuff like that.
Okay. All right. Well, that sounds like a hell of a storyline. I can't wait to see what you come up with.
Oh, I'm hoping it's half as good as I'm imagining it.
Well, so it sounds like it's headed in that direction for sure. Good. All right. Okay. Is there anything else that you would like to share about your work, or the audio books, the writing, the novels, anything, as long as we're here?
Well, I know one thing I could do. Mm-hmm. In addition, many people don't know that in addition to writing thrillers, military thrillers, all of my previous books were military thrillers. I've got one romance short story that got published in an anthology a couple years ago, and I've got one comedy, which I want to write more of that particular one. Over the years, I developed, and this will sound a little bit weird, but I developed these characters, the 4 leprechaun brothers that live in my basement. Feely, Neely, Boffin, and Bertold came to me as I don't know what the inspiration came for them. I was doing this podcast called Voices in My Head, which was for the audiobook narrator profession, and I was interviewing audiobook narrators and posting it, and at the I don't know, somewhere along the line there, when I started doing it, I would have this little leprechaun come out at the very end and ask an absurd question for the interviewee to answer. And after I would once or twice, then suddenly in my mind, the leprechaun became the oldest of 4 brothers. And so all 4 leprechauns would come in and start interviewing the guest on their own. And of course, I would put a leprechaun on the screen in front of my face. But basically, the leprechauns would come out and they would do the interview, and then they'd have a conversation of their own, a 4-way conversation sometimes, because, there's 4 of us in here with him in the booth. And, well, it's not that big of a booth, and somebody got gas in here. So the conversations would go like that. And after about 3 years of playing these characters and sending out little short stories in my emails at work, when I would write to my customers a serious thing, and then at the bottom I would put, by the way, for those interested, and I have a little short story about the leprechauns, something that they did. And then I started collecting those emails, and then I started going back through the scripts that I had written. I was like, dude, you've written a book. Put this together. And so I put it all together, and it became my first Leprechaun. The Brothers 4 is the name of the series. And the first and currently only book that's out there is called Appetizers of the Gods. And it's a story where these 4 leprechauns suddenly show up at my house, except in this case, it's a single guy named Colin who has a Yorkie, just like mine, named Heimdall. And they go on adventures with these leprechauns. But it's like, I don't know. I had been reading a lot of Terry Pratchett, and Douglas Adams had been my favorite from my teen years on. And so, yeah, it's been compared with those. And it's a blast. I'm actually working on the second one of that because it's not my main genre, and I was on contract to get a bunch of other books out. I'd only gotten an outline for the next book, but the next one follows a time traveling scheme. Colin, who's the main human character, his cousin Leonard happened across a plan of building a TARDIS on the dark web. And little did he realize that it was the real plans for the real TARDIS, not the BBC mock-up. And so he built it thinking, oh, cool. And then he accidentally set it off. And he showed up back in Viking times, lands on top of a Viking whose spirit gets sucked into the computer in the TARDIS, and he becomes the voice of the TARDIS. So there's this Viking named Ulf who's in there telling them all the things they've got to do. And so anyway, they travel through time. They go back to the Tower of Babel and try to save a sacred scroll that disappears from the future due to some sort of magic. And yeah, that's it. If you've noticed, I talk a lot. And so that's how I became a narrator and writer. To answer your first question at the very beginning of this interview, go ahead.
All right. Sounds good. Well, talking a lot does come in handy when you are in your profession, for sure. All right. Well, I think that's going to wrap us up.
Cool.
Thank you very much for coming and sharing all of this with us. It's fascinating stuff at every angle. So, recording artist,
it's a fun business,
author, and multi-genre author.
That's it. Oh, and here's my ice hammer. Even my son's got me this for Christmas after I published the novels.
I saw that in the background. I thought you were doing some ice climbing there.
No, they got me this guy. This is in the book Ice Hammer. In the first chapters, you'll see why it's called Ice Hammer. Thanks to one of these.
Right.
So,
yep. I've started reading those, and I know what you speak of. Yes, indeed. All right. So where can people find you?
www.basilsands.com.
Good.
Facebook, I'm Basil Sands 1. There's another Basil Sands who's a veterinarian in the Bahamas. Which, interesting story related to that. I got audited by the IRS back in the 90s, or threatened with an audit back in the 90s due to the millions of dollars I had in my offshore accounts.
Right.
And I was like, oh, really? Can you give me the account numbers? And they said, huh? And turns out that the other Basil Sands was the president of the Bank of the Bahamas.
Oh.
And yeah, there's 6 of us with that name in North America. 2 in the Bahamas, father and son. 2 in Canada, father and son. And 2 in Alaska, me and my dad. And so it's like, oh, wow, Basil Sands, 6 in a row. Anyway, basilsands.com, Basil Sands 1, because I'm not the president of the Bahamas. And that's pretty much it. I'm also, if you just look up my name, Basil Sands, I'm on MeWe and LinkedIn. And And of course, if you want to, which you should do, as a matter of fact, I'm slowly psychologically reprogramming your mind to go directly to Amazon or Audible and purchase all of my books.
Of course.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Very good. All right. Well, with that, we will wrap this one up. And again, thank you for your time. Thank you for being with us here tonight. And
thank you very much.
Look forward to your story very much.
All right.
All right. Good night.
Well, that's going to do it for me here at the Werewolf Bar. Remember, you can drop me a line at brian@werewolfhunter.com. You can look me up on Facebook under Brian P. Easton. Thanks for spending some time with us here tonight. Hit the subscribe button before you leave, and until next time, happy hunting and mind the moon.